In the wake of the devastation caused by the Civil War in North Arkansas, Harrison had been founded on a hope to rebuild and to bring a new industry to the area, the railroad. Courted by Harrison businessmen, the railroad promised to supercharge North Arkansas, to make it a hub of commerce and trade in the state, and Harrison, as the line's headquarters, would become the beating heart of the railroads in North Arkansas. That would be the Harrison story. Instead, the railroads overpromised and underdelivered, and the frustration of a desperate people helped feed a racial expulsion, a railroad riot, and a Klan takeover of the town. Even after the tracks were torn up, the changes they'd made to the story of Harrison remained. Through the 1930s, Harrison advertised its all-white population as a selling point to potential residents, and black and Mexican workers were run out of town in the 1930s and 40s. As local historian Ralph Rea put it, quote, "This conduct was not sanctioned by most people in Harrison, but no definite steps were taken to rectify the wrong." With no one speaking out against them, a loud minority was able to take control of Harrison's story. The reputation of the Ozarks attracted new residents eager to live in an all-white area, and opportunists willing to use racism to their advantage. Gerald L.K. Smith turned his hatred for Jews into an icon of Arkansas, and one of the most successful Ozark tourist destinations. Orville Faubus dragged the whole state into a fight against integration, and was re-elected 5 more times afterwards. And they both attracted folks who shared those views to come be a part of the Arkansas story. And then came Al Capp, who spent 4 decades forcing the worst redneck stereotypes into the pantheon of undying American caricatures. Before Dogpatch even broke ground, locals were concerned about tying North Arkansas's economy to a park that would reinforce a terrible stereotype of who they were. As the Baxter Bulletin put it, quote, "They are afraid that Dogpatch USA will place the stamp of backwardsness and buffoonery forever upon us," unquote. But the Bulletin argued Arkansans should not worry because, quote, "A state's reputation is not made or broken by the establishment of an amusement park. It is made by the conduct of its people," unquote. Courted by Harrison businessmen, Dogpatch promised to supercharge North Arkansas, to make it a hub of tourism and recreation for the state, and Harrison, as the closest city, would become what Orlando is to Disney. That would be the Harrison story. Instead, Dogpatch overpromised and underdelivered. In 1980, Harrison refused a request for financial help, washing their hands of the park for good, and in its absence remained a question. What was the Harrison story? And who would get to tell it?
In 1961, Crooked Creek, which runs through downtown Harrison, rose from its banks and wiped out about 40% of the downtown businesses. 1973, Harrison was hit by a tornado. 1978 brought a hailstorm and millions in damages. Harrison Mayor Bill Gregg took office January 1st. Mayor Gregg expressed a hope that another crisis doesn't occur in the town of 10,000, but if it does, he wants to be ready.
In 1978, the Arkansas Gazette ran a story titled, "Harrison, a Perfect Town." Well, almost. It focused on Harrison's struggle with weather emergencies, the flood of 61, a tornado in 73, and catastrophic snowstorms in 77 and 78. But it says if not for the weather, Harrison would be nearly perfect, a serene town full of people kind to their fellow man. It claims Harrison's position as the literal crossroads between Fayetteville, Jonesboro, Little Rock, and Springfield was turning it into a trade and medical hub, and a cultural and educational center. In fact, Harrison had grown into the largest city in that area. But the article also mentions some quirks of the city. Harrison residents had a reputation for refusing to sell their land to newcomers, and the area had seen some clashes between back-to-the-land hippies, Yankee retirees, and old-timers who had lingering resentments from as far back as the Civil War. And it says that news out of Harrison, when it's not about the weather, tends to be coverage of the more religiously zealous of her residents. Specifically, one Harrison preacher who held live events where he tried to resurrect his dead mother, and a group of ministers who had tried to prevent the band Black Oak, Arkansas from playing a charity benefit concert in Harrison. Both caught a lot of publicity, though both were unsuccessful. If that 1978 article was right about what was holding Harrison back from perfection, the good news was the streak of bad weather was at its end. but the association with religious extremists was not. The Ku Klux Klan had been relatively quiet in North Arkansas since the 1959 Little Rock bombings, but in 1979, a man named Randy Howard decided to start a Northwest Arkansas chapter of David Duke's Knights of the KKK. In March, he started recruiting through classified ads in a few local papers. Then in early April, newly elected Governor Bill Clinton signed a law allowing Arkansas National Guard armories to be rented for public events. Howard saw an opportunity, and just a few days later, he booked the armory in Rogers for April 28th to host a Klan rally and membership drive featuring guest speaker David Duke. Since the armory was government property made available for the public, its use was strongly protected by the First Amendment. So, legally, the Klan could not be denied the space, as long as they followed the same rules any other renter had to. 8 days before the rally, the Arkansas Gazette broke the story with a front-page headline. The Gazette also reached out for comment from the Arkansas NAACP, who denounced the rally and called on Governor Clinton to find some way to cancel it. When the governor said he legally couldn't, the NAACP accused him of not trying hard enough and threatened to protest against him. Their very loud, very public fight played out in the press over the following days and made sure the rally stayed in the news, spreading the word farther than the Klan ever could have on its own. Even Randy Howard said so.
I saw that guy on television the other night that called that meeting up in Rogers, and I can't believe that he'll get 15 people to follow in 3 blocks. But on the other hand, I think a lot of what he said, a lot of people secretly believe.
Arkansas spent a week working itself into a frenzy over the rally. So by the time it arrived, one paper called it, quote, without a doubt, the biggest media event in Northwest Arkansas history, unquote. Outside, around 50 folks marched in protest, many of them U of A students. Inside, about 300 members of the police, press, and public packed the armory to see what David Duke had to say.
We as white people are going to stand up and defend our culture, our heritage, and our right to exist in this continent.
And he was well received. Riding high off that success, Howard scheduled another rally in Duke's speech, this time at the University of Arkansas Little Rock. Again, groups publicly pressured Clinton to bar the Klan. Again, he claimed he legally couldn't. And again, that back and forth kept the rally in the news. The Klan took advantage by bringing in all the night's biggest names, including Louis Beam, Don Black, and Thom Robb. And a clash between protesters and counter-protesters before the rally led to multiple arrests. And, of course, even more press. From mid-April to mid-June of 1979, everyone in Arkansas was talking about the Klan. Local papers carried Klan coverage almost daily, often on the front page. There were political cartoons and think pieces, and the editorial pages were flooded with hot takes. One in the Northwest Arkansas Times suggested the Klan should go to U of A football games to remind the Razorback crowd that, quote, here they have left their all-white neighborhoods, gone to their all-white cocktail parties at their all-white country clubs just to come and cheer for a half-black football team and call it our team, unquote. Meanwhile, an op-ed in the Benton Courier shrugged off concerns about a Klan forming in Rogers, doubting it would disturb anyone since, quote, there are very few Negroes, Catholics, and Jews in the county, unquote. But the Eagle Democrat replied, quote, we don't think there's a pickup load of black people in Benton County, but we know that Benton County isn't short of those misdirected sight and misdirected mental processes, unquote. Opinions ranged from upset at the Klan to upset at people giving them so much attention. But above all else, there was a defensiveness, a sense of indignation. As a Rogers resident put it, quote, it makes the people of Rogers look like a bunch of bigots, and they're not. They're hurt, and they don't understand why the Klan are picking on us, unquote. The rallies also stirred a debate over the role of the press, to ignore or not to ignore the Klan. That was the question. Some argued any press coverage gave the Klan free advertising and helped them seem more powerful and prevalent than they really were. Others said staying quiet would allow the Klan's beliefs to spread unchecked and make it harder to organize protests or expose local members. But there was another argument for staying silent, a financial one. Agriculture had always been the main business of Arkansas, but as farming became more automated and corporate, it needed fewer workers, and Arkansas was struggling to create new jobs as quickly as they were lost. Poverty was rampant, and there was fierce competition among cities to draw in new businesses and keep the ones they already had. So the last thing any city wanted was to lose business over a negative reputation, the kind they might get if headlines tied them to the Klan. That made reporting on the Klan a kind of business decision. Report on rallies in your own city, and you risk hurting local businesses or scaring away your paper's sponsors. But report on the Klan in other places, and you might draw attention away from anything negative in your own neighborhood. Those fears caused some news sources to intentionally report less on Klan stories in their own backyard, but lean into coverage of rallies in other cities. Northwest Arkansas newspapers had been tipped off about the Rogers rally in advance, but they were planning not to cover it until the Little Rock-based Arkansas Gazette broke the story. Meanwhile, Little Rock papers were accused of over-covering the Rogers rally, but then getting suspiciously quiet about the one at UALR. Some reporters were even blunt about the pressure to avoid local associations. A writer for a Rogers newspaper, talking about the Rogers Armory rally, said, quote, "I wish the meeting had been in Fayetteville, then we could have really covered it," unquote. If the Arkansas Klan was making a comeback, every city in Arkansas wanted to point the blame somewhere else. And if they couldn't, better to not talk about it at all. Following the Little Rock rally, Howard tried to schedule another Duke speech 3 weeks later at Fort Smith Southside High School, but the school district just denied the reservation and were ready to go to court over it. Eventually, the rally relocated to a public park and pulled a crowd of about 300, just like in Rogers. But the press coverage, both before and after, was anemic in comparison, a few paragraphs at most. The same thing happened again a few weeks later in Texarkana. Whether a conscious decision by the Arkansas press or a sign the initial shock value had worn off, coverage of the night's events in Arkansas withered. The next year, it threatened to flare up again when Duke and Howard arranged a Klan march at Fort Chaffee amidst the Cuban refugee crisis. But instead, it was their last hurrah. A few months later, Duke quit the Knights to advance his political career, and Randy Howard, the would-be Arkansas Klan leader, faded into obscurity. Meanwhile, it took a while for Arkansas to really notice Thom Robb. He'd been living in the state and publishing white power papers from a North Arkansas address since 1971. In 1975, he caught his first bout of local press for his protest and arrest in Hot Springs, and for his White People Committee's anti-Jewish billboard. And that June, the Harrison Daily Times ran a front-page story on Robb and his publishing empire. Like so many stories would, it juxtaposed Robb's mild-mannered appearance against some of his more inflammatory quotes. But then, local coverage went quiet for a few years, while Robb focused on raising his national profile. The 1978 Almost Perfect article mentions other headline-grabbing Harrison area preachers, but not Robb. At the 1979 Rogers rally, Robb had been the opening and closing act, but press only mentioned him in passing. In 1980, a nationally syndicated expose on Christian identity singled out Robb's growing influence, but it didn't seem to bother Arkansas. In 1981, Robb held an America First Klan rally in Texarkana, and again he was largely ignored. Even his big national break, leading the 1982 Knights rally in D.C., barely made a splash back home. But in the background, something bigger was building. After Duke left the Klan, Robb positioned himself to take advantage of the power vacuum and to spread Christian identity within the Knights. Identity also went viral with neo-Nazis and anti-government militias like the Posse Comitatus and the CSA, spread and reinforced through mail-order cassette tapes, pamphlets, and newsletters, all available, for a modest fee, from Thom Robb at his P.O. Box in Harrison. Robb's relentless networking, publishing, and distribution brought his influence to thousands of Americans, all convinced the country was just one spark away from the cleansing fire of a race war. And yet, outside of those circles, he remained mostly unknown. So in May of 1983, when Robb held a Christian Identity Conference in Harrison, he once again got little to no attention. But on June 3rd, the nationwide manhunt for Gordon Kahl led law enforcement through Arkansas, ending in the deadly shootout and inferno in Smithville. About a week later, the Anti-Defamation League, a Jewish advocacy group, issued a report titled The Identity Churches, a Theology of Hate. It laid out the basic white power beliefs of Christian identity and named several of its most prominent organizations and individuals, including some from the Ozarks, the CSA, Gordon Kahl's Posse Comitatus, and Thom Robb. The connection to Kahl gave the story legs, and around June 23rd, multiple Arkansas papers ran articles calling Thom Robb a hate leader from Harrison. That exact same week, those papers also covered a fight over a Klan rally planned for Newport, about 45 minutes south of where Gordon Kahl was killed. A Klansman had leased private property for the event, but the landowner said he'd been tricked into the agreement and wanted out. The Klan claimed the real reason was pressure from city officials, and while he hadn't initially been involved, Thom Robb stepped in to take control of PR, announcing the Klan would reschedule the rally, but this time apply to meet on public land. Quote, "We were going to have a private, peaceful rally, but now we'll have to be the guests of the citizens of Newport," unquote. So the same month Gordon Kahl's death had brought massive negative national attention to Arkansas, Thom Robb, now locally labeled a hate leader, was trying to hold a Klan rally near where Kahl had died. Over the course of 6 days, the story went from a minor oddity to coverage on local news stations, the front page of the Democrat, and inclusion in a nationally syndicated piece about Klan rallies. And that was too much bad press for locals to ignore. The mayor of Newport, Wayne Beard, said he would bar the Klan from using any parks or public areas, arguing city land was for city residents only, not outsiders. The rally was eventually canceled, but stories about the back and forth continued into July, when the Knights went to McCrory and held another America First rally. The Knights never actually managed to meet in Newport, but the fight to keep them out and the headlines it inflicted brought back the same fears from 4 years before in Rogers and Little Rock. The anxiety, the anger, the resentment, the tune was the same, but some important words had changed. Quote, "Newport, the Jackson County seat where Klan members had wanted to hold a promotional rally, has suffered from the mere suggestion that the Klan is active there. Oh, Mayor Beard figures there are Klansmen in Newport, but the local people haven't been visible. The Klan publicity has instead been stirred by a national KKK leader from Harrison and the state organization's Grand Kleagle. As with many community leaders in Arkansas, Beard is particularly concerned about the potential impact the KKK hustlings might have on Newport's continuing efforts to attract industry. You may tell them that you don't have any racial problems or anything, but you still have this stigma of the Klan publicity," said Beard, reiterating that the publicity that taints Newport has been generated by those outsiders. Harrison and Walnut Ridge, as the respective homes of the KKK's national chaplain and the state Klan leader, have their own image problems, but their problems, like Newport's, tend to rub off on the rest of us," unquote. By July of 1983, Thom Robb's presence was already damaging Harrison's reputation, and other towns where the Klan planned events were trying to escape the same fate by insisting the issue was not their quiet, local Klansman, it was the outsider, Thom Robb.
"For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. Not unto the Negroes, not unto any other people, unto us a son is born."
It is this identity philosophy, a combination of revisionist Christianity and neo-Nazism, that now unites the white far-right movement. This network includes identity leaders, among them Thomas Robb, and Jim Ellison, head of the Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord in Arkansas.
Much like Thom Robb, the Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord and their compound on Bull Shoals Lake spent the 1970s relatively unknown by most Arkansans. Awareness grew as the CSA was covered by local news and even featured in documentaries. But following Gordon Kahl's death, and the ADL report linking the CSA to Call's Posse Comitatus, that awareness ramped up and turned into anxiety. There was a growing dread that, just like Call, the CSA was headed for a violent end.
Many people we've talked with fear the covenant, the sword, and the arm of the Lord will end with death and destruction.
A few weeks after the Newport dust-up, Thom, Robb, and Jim Ellison both attended Richard Butler's 1983 Aryan Congress, along with a legion of white power warriors whipped into a fury over Gordon Call's death. And the decisions they made kicked off a chain reaction. The most militant members formed the Order, who committed armed robberies and murder across America, often using illegally modified weapons sourced from the CSA. Meanwhile, the CSA agreed to become the hub of white power paramilitary training and weapons sales. And while the Order was terrorizing America, the CSA did the same in Arkansas, though it took a while before they were tied to those crimes. But in June of '84, a man connected to the CSA killed an Arkansas state trooper, and suddenly Arkansas's background anxieties became foreground fears. Even Governor Clinton responded, pushing legislation outlawing paramilitary training, despite objections from the CSA during a meeting in Harrison. Stories about the CSA dominated North Arkansas news for the rest of the year, and left everyone wondering, when would the confrontation finally come?
CSA leaders say they've been told on several occasions that state and federal authorities plan to raid their camp. Noble says if that happens, it would be regrettable for everyone involved.
On April 15, 1985, 23 members of the Order were indicted for murder, robbery, assault, arson, and counterfeiting. Many of them were already in jail, but some were hiding out at the CSA. One was arrested near Rogers, and then there was David Tate, the former print setter for Richard Butler's White Power newsletters. 2 hours after the indictment, Tate was pulled over just north of the Arkansas-Missouri border on Highway 65, the highway that runs between Harrison and Branson. Tate killed one officer, wounded another, and fled into the woods, and a desperate manhunt followed. In North Boone County, roadblocks clogged the highway, homes were searched door to door, police accompanied each school bus, and helicopters buzzed overhead day and night. 4 days later, while Tate was still on the loose, the FBI began their siege of the CSA. Things in North Arkansas became even more tense, and national media swarmed into the area, creating what the Baxter Bulletin claimed was this area's biggest news story ever. Between the manhunt and the standoff, North Arkansas was once again the center of white power attention it did not want. Even after Tate was captured and the CSA peacefully surrendered, reporters lingered for weeks while the compound was cleared out, picking over the bones of the story. And some of their coverage painted a bigger picture, one that tied together at least a dozen churches, militias, and individuals into a single narrative. The Ozarks had become a hub for hate groups. The constant coverage was new, but Thom Robb was the same as he had ever been. For a decade, he'd been known in North Arkansas for preaching and printing the message of biblically backed white power. For at least 3 years, he'd held church services every week in Harrison, and he'd hosted Christian identity conferences there too. So it wasn't particularly surprising when he rented the American Legion building and Ramada Inn for another conference in May of 1985. It was the same thing he'd done for years, and for years, Harrison had ignored him. But 1985 was different. Just 1 month after the surrender of the CSA and the capture of David Tate, as North Arkansas was still catching its breath, news broke in Harrison that the conference was happening that weekend, and the featured speaker would be Richard Butler, the same Richard Butler who had become the face of violent white supremacy in America and who was closely tied to both the CSA and David Tate. And locals only had 2 days to figure out how to respond, to ignore or not to ignore the rally. That was the question.
Now, in just a matter of 24 hours, we were able to gather over 100 people from Harrison, Arkansas out there to show these people that we don't agree with their philosophies.
About as many people were outside protesting the conference as were inside attending. One protester said, quote, "The most unfortunate thing would be for these people to have this meeting here and there not be anyone from Harrison speaking out against them," unquote. Another said, bluntly, quote, "I just don't want Harrison to have the reputation of a town that's white supremacist," unquote.
Just back off, Mr. Robb, back off. Let me just tell you something.
It was Harrison's first organized resistance against that reputation. But the folks who might have had a much bigger impact made a different decision. The men running the American Legion decided not to cancel the rally in order to avoid a direct confrontation. The Harrison Chamber of Commerce said their plan was to not talk about it, for fear it might affect Memorial Day weekend tourism. And Harrison's mayor, Bill Gregg, said the city would treat the conference like any other small event. Quote, "It is no bother to us at all. They have done nothing to threaten the peace of the community," unquote. But the story of a serene, peaceful, unbothered community was not the one told by a week of Gazette front pages, or by the news crews from both Arkansas and adjacent states. It certainly wasn't the one told by the Memphis Commercial Appeal under the headline, "Town Fears White Separatists Will Deepen Racist Reputation." It begins, quote, "Harrison, residents of this all-white North Arkansas community say the last time a black man moved into town, he was found hanging from a local bridge," unquote. But most importantly, it wasn't the story told by the national media. For the first time, the story America heard about Harrison was the one told by Thom Robb.
Call them neo-Nazis, call them Klansmen, call them tax rebels or constitutionalists or religious patriots. They're all part of a sudden resurgence of the extreme right, and now many of them are linked by something called the identity movement. Here in the little town of Harrison, the identity movement celebrated Memorial Day weekend as a memorial to hate.
While Thom Robb was shaping the story of Harrison's present, others were busy retelling its past and had been at it for decades. In the early 1900s, groups like the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of Confederate Veterans had tried to rewrite the story of the Civil War, in part through funding hundreds of heroic monuments. The UDC had also pushed the Lost Cause narrative into history textbooks, which were taught in Arkansas schools as late as the 1960s. Those books claimed that slave owners were mostly kind to their property, that the Civil War had not been about slavery, and that the Klan had only been formed to, quote, "scare the Negroes and carpetbaggers into being good," unquote. These claims are false and easily disproved by first-hand accounts and documentation, including the list of 6 grievances the Arkansas Secession Convention gave to justify seceding. 5 of them are about slavery. The 6th is about blacks being allowed to vote. But the average Arkansan only knew what they'd learned in school or been taught by parents raised on those same texts, and it showed. During the debates over the 1979 Klan rallies, some of the op-eds echoed those Lost Cause talking points, like one claiming the Klan had been formed, quote, "to combat the brutal treatment of white Southerners by carpetbaggers and scalawags and the blacks they placed in authority," unquote. Another called the Klan a necessary extreme reaction against an invasion of carpetbaggers and against black voters ruining the states. While their influence lived on, membership in those Lost Cause groups dried up around the time the last Civil War veterans died. But in 1983, a group of Harrison men formed a new Sons of Confederate Veterans camp and named it after Confederate General J.O. Shelby, who had refused to surrender after the end of the war. The group was headed by Troy Massey, who said part of their purpose was to remind people, quote, "the real cause of the war was the constitutional right of whether a state could secede from the Union. It's nothing to be ashamed of to be a descendant of those old soldiers who fought for the defense of their homeland against the invasion of Northern troops, not over slave labor," unquote. But the Harrison SCV faced 2 problems: the Klan and the CSA. The Klan had been started by Confederate veterans and had used the Confederate flag as one of its primary symbols for decades, and the Covenant Sword and Arm of the Lord had purposely chosen a name with the same initials as the Confederate States of America because they also wanted to throw off the U.S. government and form a white-ruled country. After the 1985 raid and Robb's conference, the 2 groups were big news in Arkansas. So, thanks to their Confederate flags and their CSA belt buckles, the Harrison SCV kept getting confused for the cult or the Klan, and they were very unhappy about it. But They had a plan to procure some positive publicity, a brand new Confederate monument. And unlike other memorials they were sponsoring, which were going into cemeteries, they wanted this one to go right in the Harrison Town Square. They'd already started fundraising when they stumbled onto a way to bring it even more attention, the sesquicentennial. Arkansas was celebrating 150 years of statehood, and the Sesquicentennial Commission was happy to promote any history-related activities. So on April 6, 1986, the Boone County Confederate Memorial became the newest addition to the Harrison Town Square, a towering double-sided stone slab adorned with the official Arkansas Sesquicentennial logo and paired with a flagpole and Confederate flag. While the text of the memorial does eulogize fallen Confederates, it also plays heavily into the lost cause narrative. The inscription says the monument, quote, perpetuates the memory of those who have glorified a fallen cause, and let their virtues plead for just judgment of the case in which they perished, unquote. History was being rewritten, and not just in regards to the lost cause. The story of Harrison was shifting. Boone County did not exist until after the Civil War, and neither did the town of Harrison until it was designed by and named for Colonel Marcus LaRue Harrison, who had led Northwest Arkansas Unionists as they recaptured and defended their Ozark homes. The town's founder was a former Union captain who intentionally courted other Unionists to move in. Harrison had been so strongly pro-Union that Confederate sympathizers had tried to block it from becoming the Boone County seat, calling it a carpetbagger's town. And yet, the Boone County Confederate Memorial had been erected in the Harrison Town Square. Meanwhile, there was no similar monument nearby for Colonel Harrison or any of the North Arkansans who had died for the Union. The closest thing may have been a few miles south, at Dogpatch, where the statue of J.T. Cornpone had stood in mockery of the lost cause and Confederate monuments for nearly 20 years. But the Confederate Memorial wasn't the only way Harrison celebrated Arkansas's 150th birthday. On the 4th of July, the Harrison Daily Times released a special 150-page paper full of photos donated by the community, reprinted articles from the past, and new nostalgia-heavy pieces about Harrison and the surrounding towns. It retold some of the fundamental pieces of the area's history, from before Arkansas was even a state, all the way up to the CSA compound raid from just a year before. But nowhere in those 150 pages was there any mention that Harrison had once had a thriving population of black Arkansans, nor a single word about their fate. The next year, just a few blocks from the new Confederate monument, the old Harrison High School building was leased to the local Historic Society to be turned into a history museum, or rather, a heritage museum. The very first room filled was the War Between the States room, and its content was curated, its story written, by the sons of Confederate veterans. Between the 1983 fight with Newport and the 1985 Harrison Identity Conference, Robb had developed a reputation in North Arkansas for bringing in negative press. Towns got nervous if they heard Robb was coming to visit, and some of them were willing to push back. So it's no surprise that in 1986, when Robb tried to organize a Christian identity rally in Marshall, local backlash was so strong it never happened. What was surprising was how it was reported on. At the time, most Arkansas news outlets didn't say a word about it, but almost a year later, the Memphis Commercial Appeal turned it into a syndicated front-page feature. Quote, on the surface, it seemed a simple, clear-cut story, the little town that kept the white supremacists out. Ask why Marshall, Arkansas closed its doors to a Christian identity conference, however, and the story becomes less heroic. Some residents said fear of media attention provoked people to pressure the church to cancel. Others were indignant because foreigners would come in. Few, however, expressed much dismay about the content of the conference. We've never had the Klan or blacks in this county. We wouldn't tolerate neither one. Searcy County dispatcher Ben Boyd chimed in to scattered laughter from the other men. Unquote. And that's the point of the piece. Multiple folks from Marshall expressed their own racial views and said their friends and family members belonged to identity churches and had invited the conference in. For them, the problem with the conference was not the white power message. It was the foreigners and the unwanted attention Thom Robb might bring. And those opinions didn't come from just anybody. They came from Searcy County law enforcement and dispatchers, from the owner of the Marshall Mountain Wave newspaper, and from the mayor of Marshall, from people in power in North Arkansas. Some syndicated versions of the story only included the canceled rally and the conversation at the sheriff's department. They left off the final piece of the story. A post-interview photo op with Thom Robb. Quote, Thom Robb, the National Klan chaplain, wanted his picture taken in front of the Confederate War Memorial at the courthouse in Harrison. Never mind that his relatives fought on the other side. The memorial appealed to him. As he pointed out some details in the stone, a car slowly circled the town square and then stopped. A young man in sweatpants and a football jersey approached, his manner menacing. "You're Thom Robb, aren't you? I don't want you taking your picture in front of this." The man identified himself as a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. He began a short, rambling discourse about how the Klan had abandoned its original purpose and how much trouble it has caused his organization since. "I agree with you people up to a point. I know you're trying to do things for white people," the young man said. "To be truthful, I guess a lot of folks come here to live away from blacks. But you take up the Confederate flag and the blacks and the Jews and the Catholics see it, then when we do it, they say, 'Oh, you're the Klan.'" Robb, smiling, watched the man drive away. "Did you hear what he said about people moving here to get away from blacks? I told you we had a lot of support out there." Unquote. By 1987, people in North Arkansas, in Marshall and in Harrison, acknowledged that the Arkansas Ozarks was attracting both loud white supremacist leaders and people looking for a quiet, peaceful life away from blacks. The loud ones were labeled foreigners and outsiders, pariahs no one wanted to be associated with. But the ones who believed the same things quietly, they just became neighbors.
Talk to me a little bit about Harrison. Why did you come to Harrison?
Why did I come to Harrison? For two reasons. The low cost of living, the low cost of real estate, and probably more importantly than anything else is lack of blacks. I can give you probably 200 names of people who have retired here, and they tell me that the reason they chose to retire in Harrison was the exact same reason I did.
2 months after the commercial appeal story, many of Robb's white power associates were charged with seditious conspiracy to be tried in Arkansas. Robb's connections to the trial put him back in the news, and also made the elders of his church nervous. They'd already been kicked out of the Harrison American Legion after the press around the 1985 conference, and they did not want to lose another venue or attract more attention. So instead, in May of 1987, they split with Robb, and he and his followers began meeting at Robb's house in an unincorporated part of Boone County about 15 miles outside Harrison. It's technically closer to a place called Zinc, but Zinc is a town, not a city, and struggles to keep a population above 100. The roads in Zinc are not paved, and it relies on Harrison for its essential services. The U.S. Postal Service does not even recognize Zinc, so Robb's house has a Harrison address. But after the move, reporters would often attribute stories about Robb to Zinc instead of Harrison, and Harrison was in absolutely no hurry to correct them. But the loss of his old church did not slow Robb's momentum. He knew that in 1988, for the third time in 6 years, national news would descend on Arkansas for a white power story. With Call and the CSA, Robb had accidentally benefited from the timing, but this time he had months in advance to plan exactly how to take advantage. In the 3 weeks leading up to the Fort Smith sedition trial, he staged a whirlwind tour of 15 nearby cities, railing against the charges. He also preached his usual messages against race mixing and in favor of white power, plus some new talking points like calling AIDS a blessing from God.
Do you think our forefathers stood for queers? Do you think George Washington was a faggot?
It was the most concentrated effort Robb had ever put into Arkansas, and with each stop, more Arkansans were introduced to their neighbor, Thom Robb, the Klan chaplain from Harrison.
The crowd was not receptive to the Klan's message.
Bullshit! Bullshit! Bullshit!
It's the same type of reception you always get when you have bigots, who are not willing to listen to free speech.
In Clarksville, he was drowned out by university students. In Mansfield, he had eggs thrown at him. In Alma, after their PA speakers failed, Robb's group was forced to leave, but protesters surrounded their vehicles, blocking them in. When asked to intervene, local police said, quote, "The Klan found their way into Alma. Let them find their way out," unquote. The deeper implication is clear. The Klan was not visible in these cities before Thom Robb showed up, so Thom Robb is not their problem. The same implication was made in multiple cities by locals whose signs and chants told the Klan to go home.
I think it's completely wrong for a bunch of outsiders to come in and try to stir up trouble in our community.
It was an echo of the story Newport and Marshall had told, laying blame on the foreigner, the loud outsider stirring up trouble in their otherwise peaceful, friendly towns. But that was not the only response.
The races should mix with your own races. They're anti-mixing. I agree with that 100%.
I love my race and my nation, and I want it preserved, and I don't want the freedoms taken away from my people.
A white Aryan American and proud of it!
The white race is being murdered out.
Each of the 15 rallies pulled a mixed crowd of protesters and supporters, but there was far more reporting on the ones where the crowd was loudest against the Klan. That painted Robb as an isolated anomaly, rather than the loudest symptom of the underlying issues. And cities were happy for the opportunity to deflect any blame by implying there was only one racist problem in Arkansas, and he came from Harrison. Thomas Garrett, writing for the Mountain Home-based Baxter Bulletin, put in print the Mountain Home version of what many Arkansans were likely thinking. Quote, "I'm glad Thom Robb decided to live at Harrison instead of Mountain Home, and I suspect our Chamber of Commerce is glad he lives at Harrison, and Harrison is welcome to keep him over there," unquote. Almost exactly a year later, tucked away in the 12th page of the Harrison Daily Times, was the announcement that Thom Robb had been promoted to director of the Knights of the KKK and would bring their headquarters to Harrison. Garrett responded by once again giving voice to what the average Arkansan was likely feeling, with a column titled, "Better Them Than Us." Since the rally at the Rogers Armory, Arkansas towns had been desperate to pin Klan activity on any city but their own. Now more than ever, Thom Robb had done them all a favor, painting a huge, clear target on Harrison. And the people of Harrison had a choice to make: to ignore or not to ignore Thom Robb.
Dear sir, this poor old man is obviously starved for attention and publicity. Let us just ignore him and pray he will return to Detroit, Michigan with his ego problems and find a nice nursing home in which to spend his declining years.
Herb Lair, editor for the Harrison Daily Times, received about a dozen letters regarding the move. Most were opposed to it, and, unlike that first one, most advocated for speaking out against Robb, rather than ignoring him. Some opposed him based on religion. Others were just ethically against the Klan. And, as ever, there was fear the Klan connection could hurt the local economy.
I don't think it will hurt our tourist business here in Harrison.
How come?
I just do, because we have a lot of tourists and we have a lot of colored families that come through.
Ultimately, the Times printed 5 letters, all of them unified against Thom Robb controlling the story of Harrison. But the call for local resistance was undercut, just slightly, by 3 of the 5 authors asking to remain anonymous.
Somebody called in and said, "Are you having an organized demonstration?" There's been nothing organized. All I've heard are a few comments on the street, a few letters to the editor.
Later that year, Robb held his first major event in the area as head of the Knights. National reporting made note of how strange it was that no one showed up to protest. As Ralph Rea had written in 1955, this conduct was not sanctioned by most people in Harrison, but no definite steps were taken to rectify the wrong.
Robb says his community, which incidentally has less than 10 black residents, silently supports him. Harrison will be the official home of the Klan as long as Thom Robb is Imperial Wizard, and there is no limit on how many years Robb can serve.
By the time Thom Robb took over the Knights, the Ku Klux Klan had lost most of its former power and membership. Lawsuits had shut down many of the larger, more violent clans, and those that remained were less successful at recruiting than other white power and anti-government groups. Back in the 1920s, membership in the then unified Klan had peaked at around 5 million Americans, but by the 1990s, assessments put total Klan membership at around 5,000, divided among multiple clans across the country. The Knights might have been the largest remaining clan, but still, Robb was facing a serious uphill battle to keep them from fading out of relevance. But he did have one advantage. Nearly every American had heard of the Klan, but most did not know how weak the group had become, or that it was split into a bunch of unrelated infighting branches. Nor did they know the Knights were trying to be the kinder, gentler Klan, at least by comparison. For most folks, the letters KKK conjured visions of lynchings, of beating freedom riders, of burning crosses in front yards. So the name still carried plenty of shock value and generated free press, and Robb knew exactly how to use that to his advantage. In his first year as leader, he caught attention for launching a Knights Crush Crack Cocaine program and for holding a rally on MLK Day in honor of King's assassin. They were the same kinds of purposely provocative things he'd done for decades, but now they weren't the actions of a Klan chaplain or some fringe identity preacher from Arkansas. They were the actions of the national director of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And, for all most people knew, that just sounded like he was leading the whole Klan, and news reports often incorrectly shorthanded it that way, making Robb, and whatever he did, seem even more important. But the media also loved when they could joke about the Klan, or poke at some perceived irony. In 1990, after a series of mail bombings were blamed on the Klan, Robb went viral for claiming the culprit was trying to give his Knights a bad name. And every few months there was a news story about how wacky it was for Robb to try and make the Klan more media-friendly.
Under the leadership of Grand Wizard Thom Robb, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan are working to clean up the Klan's image.
Is this the image that you want for the Klan? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
That dichotomy of serious or silly became the hallmark of how Robb was represented in the media. Depending on the tone of the story, he was either the mastermind behind a dangerous white power group on the verge of resurgence, or a quirky racist grandpa trying his darndest to clean up the Klan's image. And either way, he was never more than a month or two away from his next headline. Robb's rising stardom and the relocation of the Knights' headquarters was not just a problem for Harrison. All of Arkansas heard about it, and, just like they had for the past decade, worried about the reputational harm of being associated with the Klan. As the Gazette said, quote, "This means we fear that the periodic news stories about Klan activity will appear under a Harrison, Arkansas dateline," unquote. But it also offered a glimpse of optimism that maybe Robb would be too busy with Klan duties elsewhere to stir up trouble locally. And Robb did spend a lot of 1990 in England, Arkansas, where a fight between black and white students gave him the opportunity to jump into the middle of another media circus. And in May of '91, he led a protest against the Fort Smith School Board after they banned the Confederate flag from official use at Southside High. Those both made local news, but neither broke through nationally. But in June of '91, Robb announced he'd bought 40 acres of land near his home and had begun building cabins and other camp amenities, both to serve as the Knights' headquarters and in preparation for a summit that October, the Klan Congress.
In just a few months, this land will become the national headquarters for the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
Will Klan rallies and burning crosses become a common sight in Northwest Arkansas? Find out in a special report Monday on Channel 7 News at 6.
Local coverage of the new construction started in June, but within weeks it exploded into multiple syndicated stories and an article in Newsweek titled "Coming Soon, Club KKK." Reactions from Arkansans were largely negative, including Governor Clinton, who said, quote, "They have a constitutional right to locate wherever they want, but I'm really sorry they picked our state," unquote. And some folks from Harrison said the same thing. But that was not the tone from Bill Gregg, the mayor of Harrison. He had been mayor in 1983 when the ADL report sparked statewide headlines of Thom Robb, hate leader from Harrison. He had been mayor in 1985 when he predicted Robb's rally with Richard Butler would be no bother at all. He had been mayor for almost a decade of Robb slowly taking control of Harrison's story. So if anyone should have known what Robb stood for and the fear and frustration he'd already caused the community, it should have been Mayor Gregg. And yet, when asked about the Klan Congress in 1991, Harrison's mayor Bill Gregg said he was opposed to the old Klan's ideas and was against Robb's Klan, quote, if indeed they are racists, unquote. And in regards to Robb himself, the mayor said, quote, he's been a good citizen because he certainly hasn't caused anybody any trouble. It's hard to criticize a person who's done nothing to be criticized for, unquote. That October, cameras were rolling, ready to show the country all of the nothing Thom Robb was doing.
Reporters were given limited access to the site, but were allowed to question media-conscious National Director Thom Robb. The Klan plans to construct dormitories, offices, and classrooms here. Officials hope to soon offer Klan lessons on public relations and handling the media. Robb says, quote, Louisiana gave us one David Duke. We will give the country thousands like him.
David Duke had left the Knights in 1980, right after his tour through Arkansas, in part because he'd felt the Klan brand was holding back his political career. That move seemed to pay off in 1989 when he won a seat in the Louisiana House of Representatives. Then, in 1991, Duke entered the race for governor. In the lead up to the primary, Duke was not just campaigning locally, but also appearing on talk shows and national news programs, raising his profile to the highest it had been since his Klan days. David Duke's resurgence, and his position as Robb's predecessor in the Knights, was part of why the Klan Congress got so much coverage. The Congress took place the weekend before the primary. In between, Robb's quote about giving America 1,000 Dukes and the story of his Ozark Klan camp was syndicated across the country. And then, Duke made it through the primary, becoming the Republican nominee for governor of Louisiana. The two stories amplified each other as America faced the prospect of a former Klan leader as a state governor and a camp in Arkansas training more Klan politicians to follow in his footsteps. Even though Duke ended up losing, that became an opportunity to bring up the camp and the 1,000 Dukes quote again, and it came back a third time in December after Duke announced he was running for president. Thom Robb had managed to strike a nerve with Americans who wanted to think the Klan was a relic of the past and that David Duke's success was an anomaly. Because what if it wasn't? What if this was the beginning of a comeback led by Robb and Duke and an army of white power people who wore suits and spoke well and won elections, all thanks to their training from that camp in Arkansas? Between the 4 months of press leading up to the Klan Congress, and then 3 more afterwards for the 1,000 Dukes story, 1991 was the year Thom Robb broke through nationally. And it signaled a shift. Robb was no longer just affecting the story of Harrison or the Ozarks, he was causing Americans to associate the Klan with Arkansas. On the one hand, Robb was leading one branch of a mostly dead Klan, and their headquarters was little more than an in-home office and a campground. On the other, roughly 100 years of active marketing and reputation had made the Arkansas Ozarks a gathering place for white supremacists and separatists. Robb was just the most obvious symptom. But none of that complexity mattered. The simplest version of the story, the one that could spread easily, was that Arkansas was the home of the Klan. And part of the reason it could spread so easily was the state's reputation. Arkansas had been stereotyped as poor, dumb, and hostile to outsiders for most of its existence, and the Central High Crisis had become a pillar of American history classes. So, for Americans with no other context, the name Arkansas conjured images of hillbillies and racism. And that made it easy for people to believe that the Klan would call Arkansas home, because it fit their existing story. And that was the story they wanted to tell. Just as other Arkansas towns had done to Harrison, other states were happy to make Arkansas their scapegoat. In Tennessee, the literal birthplace of the first Klan, Locals were already talking about Robb as an outsider, asking why the Klan wouldn't leave their quiet towns alone and go home to Arkansas. The Klan Congress gave Robb more momentum than he'd ever had before, but it also put him on a crash course with maybe the only Arkansan who could steal headlines from a national Klan leader, Governor Bill Clinton. Clinton definitely knew how white power stories could feed into Arkansas's racist reputation. He'd been in the middle of the fight over the 1979 Klan rallies. He'd taken on disarming the CSA, and he'd dealt with Thom Robb multiple times. He'd also tackled the grain of truth behind the hillbilly image, bringing in modern industries to replace lost farming jobs and pushing education reforms that massively improved state literacy rates. So by the time he announced his run for president, Clinton was well liked locally, and Arkansans were hopeful his campaign could continue forging a more positive image for the state. Clinton and Robb were the same age. Both were working their way from Arkansas famous to nationally known. Robb sold himself as a moderate Klansman, and Clinton painted himself as a moderate third-way Democrat, and that created an overlap in who they were reaching out to. Political pundits at the time had a term for them: the Bubba vote. Rural, white, working-class Southerners, culturally conservative but distrustful of the government. For many, the term also implied some amount of racism, not the overt old Klan kind, but the new David Duke version. Pundits claimed the Bubba vote was how David Duke had gotten so far, and that it might be the key for Clinton's win, which put Clinton in a tricky position, trying to fight against Arkansas's racist and redneck image while also courting voters who most closely resembled it. And Robb had a similar problem. His 1,000 Dukes plan was all about recruiting and grooming Klansmen who did not look or sound like Bubba's, but selling Klan memberships and merchandise, including to Bubba's, still paid his bills. Clinton launched his campaign on October 3rd, just 1 week before Robb's Klan Congress, and for both of them, it was the beginning of a year of non-stop events and appearances, both feeding and fighting Arkansas stereotypes. Clinton had buttons that said, "I still believe in a place called Hope." Thom Robb had a shiny new banner advertising the night's P.O. box in Harrison. In 1992, America would decide what they associated more with Arkansas: Hope or Harrison, the White House or the White Hood. On January 20th, Robb co-hosted a Klan rally at the Colorado State Capitol on MLK Day. Violent counter-protests ended with multiple police injuries and protesters arrested. 4 days later, Arkansas inmate Ricky Ray Rector was put to death after Clinton had pushed for the execution to help build his tough-on-crime credentials. Instead, the country paid more attention to another Arkansas story: his alleged affair with Jennifer Flowers. In February and March, Robb was featured in 2 CBS specials.
Thom Robb from Arkansas is also here. He's the national leader of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, the Grand Wizard.
In Arkansas's Ozarks, Klan Grand Wizard Thomas Robb plans to run for office too.
Power in this country. I think that's what we're aiming for.
On March 2nd, Clinton gave a tough-on-crime speech and photo op at a youth prison in Stone Mountain, Georgia, the town where the Klan had been reborn in 1915 and home to the largest Confederate monument in the world. Clinton's opponents accused him of intentionally signaling to white voters, quote, "We have them under control, folks. Don't worry." Unquote. On March 8th, the Whitewater scandal broke, tying the Clintons and other Arkansas politicians to a shady failed real estate deal. And a few days later, Clinton was called out for regularly playing golf at the all-white country club of Little Rock, which had been accused of intentionally blocking black membership. In response, on March 26th, the LA Times claimed Clinton's path to the presidency was muddied by scandals from Arkansas, a third world state, a small, backward southern place where mind-numbing, mostly rural poverty was the norm. March 31st, Robb filed to run for the Arkansas House of Representatives, the only Republican to file in his district. Even though he was not likely to win, the state GOP denounced him, which he viewed as excellent advertising. Clinton spent April and May winning state after state as his nomination became inevitable, but Robb was able to maintain headlines at the same time. On May 1st, the ACLU filed a lawsuit on behalf of Robb's Knights after Arkansas denied their application for the state Adopt a Highway program. The Knights had specifically requested Highway 65 north of Harrison at the Missouri border, where Branson tourists enter Arkansas and the site of the David Tate manhunt. And in late May, Robb stayed in the news thanks to a series of contentious Klan rallies, including one in Dubuque that turned violent. 5 days later, Clinton played saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show, presenting himself as cultured, clever, and comfortable in a predominantly black space, trying to break multiple Arkansas stereotypes at once. 9 days after that, Robb went on Geraldo to present his image of Arkansas.
People should be hired in this country according to their ability, not because of the color of their skin.
What about Martin Luther King Day?
We feel sorry for them. And a lot of people feel that way, and they're going to write to us at Post Office Box 22,
They keep talking about heritage.
Harrison, Arkansas.
You gave your address 6 times.
Harrison, Arkansas. Harrison, Arkansas.
If you really are nice people, Thomas, why don't you just... Why don't you take the sheets out, burn them, and start a whole new group? The nice guys of Harrison, Arkansas.
Just 3 days later, Clinton gave a speech at a convention of the Rainbow Coalition. Another guest was rapper and political activist Sister Souljah, who had made a series of controversial comments about the LA riots, including, quote, "I mean, if black people kill black people every day, why not have a week and kill white people?" unquote. Clinton took the opportunity to distance himself from a perceived extremist within his own party, a move now known as a Sister Souljah moment. And he did it by comparing her words to America's best-known Klansman.
If you took the words white and black and you reversed them, you might think David Duke was giving that speech.
On July 6th, Time magazine ran a multi-page feature on Robb titled White and Wrong, the clearest sign yet that he'd become a national presence. The piece is full of Arkansas ties, descriptions of Robb's home and the Klan camp, and mentions of his run for state office. And it ends with Robb in his backyard gesturing to the Ozarks, saying, quote, "If that could be the only way of saving white people, I'd burn the whole forest down," unquote. On July 10th, that year's Aryan Congress began, and Robb caught headlines for telling his fellow Nazis and Klansmen they should all embrace nonviolence, like him. Just as the Congress ended, the Democratic National Convention began, and on July 16th, Clinton officially became the party's nominee, and acknowledged the hits Arkansas was taking.
And so, I say to all of those in this campaign season who would criticize Arkansas, come on down.
And they did. On July 20th, Maclean's magazine ran a piece on Clinton's Dixie, which included interviews with Arkansans about the stereotypes stirred up during the campaign. A man from Forest City was fine with the negative image, quote, "because it probably keeps a lot of folks from moving here," unquote. A woman from 30 miles south of Harrison called the area, quote, "one of the remotest, poorest counties, and people here always made it pretty clear to blacks that they had better get out before sundown," unquote. And on the first page, just under the picture of Governor Clinton, there's a guest appearance by Reverend Thom Robb, the Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Possibly the first widespread story to explicitly link the two. The same month, a column in the Harrison Daily Times lamented, quote, "The Eastern liberal media has found Arkansas in recent months. Mr. Clinton and Mr. Robb in the spotlight." Although he'd found his way into the spotlight, Robb was unable to find his way onto the ballot. On September 12th, the Arkansas GOP voted to block him from running as a Republican. Robb sued, but 10 days later lost, causing much delight for party chairman Asa Hutchinson. Less delightful were the 2 weeks of national headlines it generated connecting the Klan and Arkansas. And that same month, a syndicated New York Times piece called Arkansas, quote, "a state that has the feel of an endless yard sale," unquote, and once again tied Thom Robb and the Klan to Bill Clinton and his state's reputation. By the end of September, Clinton was comfortably leading in national polling, so President Bush needed a new strategy. The same day Robb's case was decided, Bush held 6 rallies in the states surrounding Arkansas and debuted his new stump speech titled The Arkansas Record. The message was simple. A vote for Clinton is a vote to turn America into Arkansas, and Arkansas is awful. Both Bush and Ross Perot continued that message through their ads and debate performances, and while neither would ever outright call Arkansans hillbillies, they would focus on talking points that played into those stereotypes, making their attacks more likely to feel true to voters because it fit their existing story.
Now look, he says Arkansas is a poor state. They are. But in almost every category, they're lagging.
They rank last among the 50 states in median family income. Hourly wages, personal income, people living above the poverty level, per capita income.
Admit it that Arkansas is doing very, very badly against any standard.
Child death rates, violent teenage deaths, babies born underweight, teenage births.
On all these categories, Arkansas is right near the very bottom.
2-parent families, college education, high school graduation, per capita education spending, teachers' pay. Arkansas, after 12 years of Governor Clinton, is still at the bottom.
He would do for the United States what he's done to Arkansas. We do not want to be the lowest of the low.
But some other critiques of Arkansas were not nearly as subtle. In 1967, the Baxter Bulletin had dismissed fears of Arkansas being labeled the Dogpatch State, insisting, quote, "A state's reputation is not made or broken by the establishment of an amusement park. It is made by the conduct of its people." 25 years later, Lil Abner was long dead, and Dogpatch USA was 1 foot in the grave. And yet, Thom Robb was not the only ghost from the Ozarks haunting Clinton's campaign. Within months of announcing his run, Clinton was mocked as the governor of Dogpatch. In August, after multiple speakers at the Republican convention took shots at Arkansas, it prompted the headline, "GOP portrays Arkansas as Dogpatch." The Boston Globe said Bush's Arkansas record ad suggested Arkansas is a kind of Dogpatch USA. But the real gut punch came on October 10th, when Saturday Night Live began with a parody presidential debate. And the opening joke, the reference the writers thought everyone would know and laugh at, was Arkansas as Dogpatch.
Governor Clinton, let's be frank. You're running for president, yet your only experience has been as the governor of a small backwoods state with a population of drunken hillbillies riding around in pickup trucks. The main streets of your capital city, Little Rock, are something out of Little Abner, with buxom underage girls in cut-off denims prancing around in front of Jethro and Billy Bob, while corncob pipe-smoking, shotgun-toting grannies fire indiscriminately at runaway hogs.
The full sketch is almost 11 minutes long, and about a third of it is just jokes about the people of Arkansas being poor, stupid hillbillies. Instead of freeing Arkansas from its negative reputation, the Clinton campaign had accidentally revived old stereotypes for a new generation. Despite the stereotypes and all the negative press, by the beginning of November, the writing was on the wall. The governor of Dogpatch was going to be the next president. Bill Clinton had taken office as governor for the first time in January of 1979, and less than 3 months in, he'd faced his first fight with the Arkansas Klan. Back then, Clinton had said the state could not stop the Klan from renting the armory. It was a matter of free speech. Almost 14 years later, on his last day as just the governor, Clinton's time in Arkansas ended the same way it began. On November 2nd, the Klan's Adopt a Highway case was decided by Judge Franklin Waters, the same Judge Waters the CSA had attempted to assassinate. Waters ruled that since the Adopt a Highway signs were government property made available for public use, the Klan's application could not be denied as long as they followed the same rules other participants had to. It was a matter of free speech. The next day, America elected an Arkansan president for the first time. Within the state, there was a deep sense of pride, and also hope. Hope the Clinton win meant all those insults were water under the bridge, and Arkansas could finally overcome its image as the Dogpatch State. And, more immediately, hope for a tourism boom, as folks came to see the home state of the new first family. In anticipation, the Los Angeles Times ran the story, "All Eyes on the Land of Opportunity." It reads like a tourism pamphlet for the Ozarks, tracing its way across North Arkansas towns and extolling their virtues, including Harrison. It sings the praises of the town square, the courthouse, the lyric theater, the shopping, the music, and it ends with a playful mention of Harrison's annual Dogpatch Days and a plug for the park itself. It was the story Harrison had hoped for. The story of a serene town, the jewel of the natural state, a quaint home in the Ozarks, an almost perfect place, ready for its moment in the sun. That would be the Harrison story. Instead, the Clinton tourism boom overpromised and underdelivered, and within a year, Dogpatch closed down for good. But before that, just a month after the article appeared, the LA Times printed a brief letter in response. Quote, "Regarding the glowing article on Arkansas, yes, it is a truly beautiful state with all the attractions mentioned, plus magnificent Ozark scenery. My husband and I camped through the area this September and were charmed. However, what was omitted from the article, and what we discovered after reaching Branson, Missouri, just across the border, is that the town of Harrison, Arkansas, has the unsavory reputation of being the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan." Unquote. a stranger, a person with no connection to Arkansas or Robb, heard someone tell a nice story about Harrison and felt the need to interrupt, to step in and tell everyone listening, no, that's not true. That's not what Harrison is. She wasn't exactly right, but she wasn't entirely wrong either. Harrison's negative reputation had arrived, both locally and nationally. Now the question was, how far would it spread? Could Harrison ever control its own story again? And who will you listen to?
Harrison, Arkansas.
In northern Arkansas.
Harrison, Arkansas.
Harrison in Arkansas.
Harrison, Arkansas.
A small town you probably never heard of.
Harrison in northern Arkansas.
Harrison, Arkansas.
Harrison in Arkansas. Harrison, Arkansas.
According to three-term Mayor Bill Gregg, having the KKK in Boone County has not had much impact on the community.